everybody. Before we get started on this week's episode, I wanted to give you some really exciting news. Registration is now open for our first ever Mom as Well Read and Connect book study. What's a Read and Connect? Okay, it's simple. It's an opportunity to read a great book and have some scheduled, intentional, and hopefully uninterrupted time for some mama connection with me and other mamas from our growing community from all over the world. I am thrilled to announce that our first book will be The Connected Parent by the late Dr. Karen Purvis and adoptive mama Lisa Qualls. This book is short and simple, but it packs a big punch. It's full of real stories and practical tools for connection. Kickoff is Thursday evening, January 13th from 8 to 9:30 Central Standard Time, and we will continue through February 10th. We're going to meet together over Zoom every Thursday evening. The cost is only $30 for all 5 sessions, and the group is limited to only 15 people. So if this is something you'd enjoy, don't wait to grab your spot. The registration link is in the show notes below. Go ahead, stop, hit pause, register, and then hop back on and let me introduce you to someone I now consider a friend, the author of The Connected Parent and this week's podcast guest, Miss Lisa Qualls. All right, let's go. Welcome to the Mom as Well podcast, where we are digging deep into the gifts and the gaps of foster and adoptive parenting. I'm Tara Hutton, and I'm glad you're here. Mama's Well. Yes, she is. I am so excited about my guest today. We've been working to schedule this for a while now. She is a phenomenal lady, has been in the trenches of foster care and adoption for many, many years, and recently written a book with the late Dr. Karen Purvis. It's called The Connected Parent. I've mentioned it to you on the podcast several times. We've talked about several things that were brought up for me in that book. And so today we got her here. And so she is here, and I'm excited to kind of walk through this book and ask her some questions and share with her some of the things that were powerful and impactful for me. And there were a lot. So anyway, you're in for a treat. Welcome, Lisa Qualls. Welcome, Lisa. Thank you for joining me this morning. Actually, it's morning for you. It's afternoon for me. So
yes.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. And thanks for inviting me to be on your podcast.
You're very welcome. I feel honored to sit and talk to you. Recently I'm very familiar with Karen Purvis and TBRI down in the Houston area. Most of our child placing agencies require us to take, TBRI, or, we've gone through I think it used to be Empowered to Connect, training. When I got your book, so your new book, it came out just about a little over a year.
Yes. Yeah. During COVID. So it wasn't really an exciting book launch in the same way that we'd hoped, but yes, it came out in the summer.
The Connected Parent.
Yes.
And I've mentioned it on the podcast, on my podcast quite a bit, even read from it several times. And I'm honored to sit here with you because I'd like to just kind of walk through some of my takeaways from the book with you and get more insight. And I think and I read The Connected Child, which was by Dr. Karen Purvis. I don't know when that came out, but it's been out for a while.
2007.
2007. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you added this component to that message that was so powerful for me because you are a foster parent. Mm-hmm. You tell us about your family a little bit because it's complex, right?
It is complex. Yes. So I have 8 children by birth. And just to make it even more interesting, my oldest son was born when I was a teen. It was a long, long time ago. And I was sent to live in a foster home. I was a foster kid. Wow. And I was actually forced to give my son up for adoption. So my first son was adopted. And so I'm a birth mom and a former foster youth. And then later I met my husband, we married, we had 7 more kids together. And honestly, my experience of being a birth mom was so incredibly painful that I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd be an adoptive mom, because adoption had only wounded me. I could not see anything good in it because it had been so painful for me, and the grief had been so huge, and it all been so formative to my life. The redeeming part of all of that is that I came to know Jesus when I was pregnant with my son. And so I have to look at that and say, well, the Lord, he was there. None of this came as a surprise to him. So anyhow, I never dreamed I would be an adoptive mom. And then in 2006, some friends of ours adopted from Ethiopia. They adopted 2 little boys. And I think I share the story in the book, but it sort of broke something open in my heart. And I had been sensing that the Lord was going to do something new, that something new was coming in my life. But I thought I was going to go back to school. I thought I was going to go to grad school or something like that. But no, God had something bigger in mind, and actually something much more challenging and life transforming than graduate school, for sure.
Yeah. Sometimes I say, this is graduate school.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's like I'm getting a PhD.
Oh, I feel the same way. I have had to learn so much.
Yeah.
I mean, just so very, very much. So we went into the process also to adopt 2 little boys because girls were more commonly requested, and we had both. And so we started the process. And in the midst of that, we had been sponsoring a little girl. And the Lord made it really clear to us that she was meant to be our daughter too. So we adopted 3 unrelated children through 2 different agencies simultaneously. It was very complicated. And then when we were there, we met another little girl, and we're just very, very moved by her. And we returned for her about a year later.
Wow. So 3 came at one time.
3 came at once, and then 1 more, a little more than a year later. And then a number of years later, and I don't know, I'd have to count, but we unexpectedly became foster parents to a teen girl. And she came for a night, which turned into a weekend, which turned into 2 weeks, and then turned into 2.5 years. Wow. So we got to have her in our family. Well, she's still in our family, but in our home through high school. So, yeah.
And I love that part of the book because you talk about, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but if we don't get to this part, there's a chapter about about that. I mean, not about, that specific child, but you learned a lot about how to use these skills, this, TBRI skills and the training and with the teen, which I think I loved that section because I still have a teen at home. Well, he's not a teen, he's 18. So he's still a teen, I guess. But it's powerful to think through that because a lot of us do have younger, toddlers or so. But when you do have a teen, I mean, that's a different ball game. And so
it's very different.
That's a great chapter in there.
Well, my 2 youngest at home are 15 and 16.
Okay.
So I'm in the thick of TBRI and teens.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it was great. It was great information in that chapter. So you get these kids home and you talk about this in your book a little bit, you and I think as a foster parent and adoptive parent, you can relate with this, you have so much that you're going to bring, and especially you, because you already had kids, right? So you're like, man, I'm a parent. I know how to do this. And then you get them home and you're like, shock.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We've been parents for 20 years. My husband and I together have been parents for 20 years when we brought our first kids home from Ethiopia. And I really loved being a mom. I felt like I was a really good mom. I felt like we had done a lot of good prep to bring these kids home. And additionally, when we were in college, we worked together. My background is mental health, and we worked together at a group home for sort of high needs boys. So I really thought I had what it was going to take. And wow, what a humbling experience it was to realize that my kids' needs were very, very significant. And the traditional parenting that we had so successfully done with our other kids absolutely could not work, would not work with our new children. And it took me, I think I had some pride and I was afraid to ask for help because I didn't want anybody to know truly how badly things were going and how out of control things felt. But when I did finally reach out for help, we were able to work with a wonderful therapist in Seattle. So we drove 300 miles each way every other week for 2 years.
Wow.
To work with her because she was worth it, actually.
Now, how did you find a therapist in Seattle?
Well, I'd read her book. It was required reading for us. Her book, Attaching and Adoption, was required reading with our agency. And I remember reading her book and thinking, wow, I'm so glad there's someone out there who can help these poor families who have such challenging situations. And then I brought my kids home and we became her clients, and that sort of sums up a lot of just the unexpected. There was so much that was unexpected. And the other thing that happened is I had started blogging back in 2006 at One Thankful Mom, which people can still find.
Yes.
And I had been really sharing our journey. But when things got really, really hard, I was afraid to share it because I didn't want to discourage other believers from following the Lord if he was leading them to adopt. I didn't want to scare anybody. And I felt like I was failing and I just didn't want to admit it. But when I got more honest, people just started pouring out what was happening in their families and how they were struggling. And one of my readers actually told me about the connected child. She was probably from Texas. I wish I could remember who it was because it was so many years ago. And that's how I was introduced to Dr. Purvis. And that was life-changing.
Yeah. So knowing your, I don't know what the word is, but your go get it. I mean, if you drove to Seattle, did you get on a plane and head to Fort Worth? Or it's Texas. That's Fort Worth, right?
Yeah, Dallas, Fort Worth. I didn't. I read the book, but even more importantly, I was able to find some old videos of her teaching at an old, I don't know exactly what the conference was, but I watched those. And when I actually heard her speaking, that broke me. That just, I thought, she has hope. I'm pretty much out of hope, but she has hope. And I decided I was just going to go all in. And I started writing about what I was learning from the connected child. And through that, I ended up connecting with Michael and Amy Monroe, who had started Empowered to Connect with Dr. Purvis. And that's how the whole relationship happened. I started speaking with them and then went and did the TBRI practitioner training. And
well,
so that's how it all began.
I am so glad you did because the connected parent, and I've heard this from multiple parents, that it was so needed. Like, it's like the next step. It made it so tangible for me. I mean, even going through the training and all that, but to hear, and I used to tell our agency that I was like, you take the same training each year, right? I was like, we need like moms who are doing this to come in and like implement this, like show us how we implement this in our home, not just in a clinical setting, but like in the home. And so you did that in such a powerful way. And I mean, it's great.
Well, I felt the same way. I kept thinking, well, what does it actually sound like when you say this? I mean, how do you actually do it? And I was so thankful for all the books by experts. I mean, what a gift it is to have The Connected Child and Attaching and Adoption and all these other wonderful books. But I couldn't get past the fact that they had no idea what my life was really like. They weren't living in it like I was. And I thought, wow, what if we could blend this, like real life me with amazing Dr. Purvis, if we could put it together into a book. And so really the connected parent is the meeting of theory and practice and professional and parent. And I'm thrilled. I mean, I'm so thankful that I got to write it and that we were able to finish it. Because, Dr. Purvis passed away before it was even released. But yeah, I I hope it is. I hear that it is really meeting a need for a lot
Yeah.
of people, and I'm so grateful.
Yeah. Your book's kind of divided into sections, part one, part one, part two, part three. Okay. So I kind of looked at it like that.
Okay.
And the first section, you first talk about attachment, which is the foundation of all of this, and essentially a TBRI principle of connecting that kids miss. But then you go into knowing yourself. And so for me, that's been one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle, is understanding myself and recognizing that my children are pointing me and showing me that there were some missing pieces for me, big missing pieces. And so I want to talk about that. Like, did that start showing up for you? Once you started giving a voice, you started working this, but when did you start recognizing, oh, okay, these children are bringing up things in me, and you reference the shark music from the Circle of Security and things like that. Like, will you talk about that for you and your story? Like, maybe even some things that you haven't put in the book. I would love to hear, like, how this started. Why is it so painful?
Well, first of all, I think I had an image of myself, like I said, of being a really good mom. And it brought me, well, to my knees for sure, in desperation for the Lord to help me. But also, I think it broke me in some ways, because I've always been driven to be successful and to prove myself. And it felt like there was nothing I could do to actually make this work, and it scared me, I think. And it did cause me to reflect even then on my own childhood and how I felt I was loved. But what really, of course, brought it home for me was during TBRI practitioner training, we all have to do the adult attachment inventory. And it's a very prescribed test. But what it does is it reveals to you your attachment style. And what it revealed for me was that I did not have secure attachment as a child, but that I had become what's called earned secure later in my life. So what that means is that the good news is, if we do not have secure attachment as children, it does not mean all is lost. I think that's one thing. When I first heard about this whole idea, like, well, it starts with the parents, all I heard was more shame and more blame. Like, what? Now you're telling me that my attachment style from when I was a young child is making things worse? I mean, how much harder is this going to get? Yeah. And I took it very personally. And in the book, we were very careful to not bring shame upon parents, because you know what? We're not in control of our early childhoods. Our parents, for the most part, were all doing the very best they could. Yeah. And the attachment style we developed as children, it's not a good, bad, right, wrong. I mean, yes, it would be ideal if we all had secure attachment as young children, but the reality is that many of us didn't. And so, but when I first heard about it, I thought, okay, now I failed even before I grew up, is sort of how it felt to me.
Yeah.
And so when we did the adult attachment inventory, and I learned about being earned secure, that really gave me a lot of hope. And really, what earned secure means is that even as adults, we can develop secure attachment through these other deep connected attachment relationships. So, for anybody who doesn't know, marriage is an attachment relationship. And so I became earned secure through my relationship with my husband, of being able to trust him to keep me safe, meet my needs, all the things we talk about for our children, to give me voice, all those things. I became secure through him and through my relationship with the Lord, because as I grew in my faith, I knew that God was never going to leave me, that I was safe with him. And so with those two relationships, I was able to build secure attachment.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is fascinating, the attachment piece of the puzzle, and the behaviors that that show up that are protective and very painful to experience when you're not aware of why it's so painful, and that's been the hard part for me. And I know for many other people is just, the rejection. You mentioned rejection. You have a whole chapter on respect, and respect is one of my, big triggers. And you talk about, when I say you, I'm referring to you and Dr. Purvis, because you're kind of one voice in this book here. But
well, I'll take that as a big compliment. You can refer to me that way anytime you want.
It's a collaboration. But
yes.
You talk about respect being a trigger for people who didn't have a voice growing up. And that was definitely me, and so understanding that about myself and being able to go and nurture that about myself before I react to my child, which is the trick, has been a game changer, recognizing those triggers in ourselves. And y'all just do a great job of that, a great job of reminding. And the chapter's called Know Yourself. That's awesome. Know yourself. And it's right at the beginning of the book. It's like, that's critical. Know yourself, attachment, know yourself, know your attachment style, your and the hope that we can earn a secure attachment, which is beautiful.
It is really beautiful.
Having words for these things is awesome. Let's see. The other thing I wanted to say, staying in this first part one of the book, when you talk about the giving of yeses, as God would have it, this happened to me right before I read this book. But my daughter, we were in the kitchen, and she was winning some watermelon. So I was cutting up watermelon, and as I'm cutting up the watermelon, I'm doing a classic mom. Well, it's almost time for dinner, and we don't want to eat too much watermelon because it gets diarrhea. We don't want to be, I'm just going through all the reasons why we're not going to eat too much watermelon. And she was going to stay with a friend of mine coming up. And so Miss Joan, and she says, Miss Joni says yes a lot. She says this to me while I'm not telling her, no, I'm cutting up the watermelon, but I'm giving all these caveats about the watermelon. And my daughter says, she says yes a lot. And I said, luckily I was able to be curious. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Well, she says, when I say, Miss Joni, can we watch a show? Why, yes, Trinity, as soon as we finish cleaning up these dishes. And she just kept going, why, yes, Trinity, why, yes, Trinity. And it was so cute, but it really caught me, and to remember that. And so then, of course, as God has it, I pick up your book like right after that. And it just kept the whole yes thing kept showing up for me, like within a week's time, it was like, yes, yes, yes. Well, you describe attachment as the giving of yeses, which I loved. And I've never thought of it that way, but that's exactly what it is. Will you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah. When a baby is born and they cry and we meet their need, whatever it is, whether they're hungry, cold, frightened, whatever it is, when we meet their need, what we're essentially saying is, yes, I see your need and I'm going to meet it. And we do it over and over, thousands and thousands of times, right? We meet the need. We're giving a yes over and over. And I think as a mom, like you, it's hard to give those yeses sometimes. And we know that when life feels out of control, we will most often strive to grasp for more control. And so with that more control, we're inclined, I think, to give a lot of no's. And our kids, they benefit so much from the giving of yeses. And your friend has got it exactly right. You give the yes, but it's the yes that also is realistic and also meets the need of whatever needs to be done before you can really do what the child is asking. But rather than saying, no, we're not going to watch a show until after dinner, it's yes, we can watch a show after dinner, or whatever it is. So it takes a little bit of thought. It takes a little bit of retraining of our brains. But the giving of yeses does build safety and security for our kids.
I loved it. I just had never thought of that as the attachment. And then to get these little, snapshots in real life of like, oh yeah, why, that's not even necessary. I could just say nothing, hand the amount of watermelon that I want to give, and then that's done. It just opened my eyes, and I was grateful for her pointing it out to me in a way that was very, non-threatening, or, it was a cool little snapshot and reminder of, yeah, that's what we're doing. We're going back and we're giving yeses as often as we can.
Yes.
Yeah.
As often as we can. Yes, we do. We give yeses. It's interesting. I teach a course through the Adoption Connection called From Apathy to Empathy. And it's for parents who really, really are struggling and feeling shut down toward their kids. It's about rebuilding compassion. But one of the exercises we give people is to give your child an unexpected yes. And the stories they come back with are so delightful because the children are shocked, And so, but it has to be something just really unexpected. Like your kid says, can we get ice cream? On the way home from soccer practice, and you're thinking, ice cream? No way, dinner's almost ready. And the parent says, yes, we can get ice cream. And the kids are like, what? Like they are so shocked. And there are just so many fun stories in that group. So I encourage parents, try it. It can be a very joyful exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I want to move to section 2, which is super powerful. Part 2 of the book. You talk about, well, first of all, you have like a lot of chapters. Let's see, 2, 4, 6, 7 chapters where we're getting tools for the toolbox. Everybody's ears are tuning in right now. They're like, tools, tell us what to do. I know that's how I feel at times. Like, just tell me what to do. Right. Tell me what to do.
Our brains are so tired. We want to hear it clean and simple, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what you did in part 2. It's clean and simple. And there's a lot of them. So obviously we're not going to go through them, and I don't want to give them away. But I do want to say a couple of things that really hit me. Oh, shoot. I missed a part. Where do you talk about? No, it's there. Recognizing sensory needs.
Oh, yes.
Profound for me. Because like you mentioned a second ago, like you're in this, you are in the biggest learning curve of your life, essentially. For me, that's what it's been, the biggest learning curve of my life. And I'm trying to understand the brain. I'm trying to understand the vagal nerve and the all these things, right? I'm trying to understand, and then I'm trying to make sense of my own reactivity in this situation. Like, why am I feeling so reactive over this behavior? I'm trying to make sense of but the sensory thing, especially if it's not in your face sensory, like, if it were like, there's some stuff that I think is probably really easy to recognize as sensory, but the connection you made for me was that sensory issue can look like an attachment issue.
Yes.
That was profound. It was so profound that I immediately got on the phone trying to find an occupational therapist in my area that I could interview for the podcast. And so I did that. That's coming up.
Good.
But I want tell that perspective, because to me that could meet a lot of needs right there.
Okay. Well, I have a son,
yes.
who he was very resistant to touch. He didn't want hugs. He didn't really want that closeness. He didn't sustain eye contact. If I went to give him a hug, he would turn his back toward my chest, and then he would let me give him a little hug. But there were all these things, and I felt sure that it was attachment, like another child having attachment struggles. Like it's me. He doesn't want to attach to me. And then we were in a therapist's office, and she watched him run up to me and hit my chin with his head. Like he just kind of like ran right into me. And she asked me, I think I tell this story, but I don't say it's my own son in the book. But she asked me, does it happen very often? And of course it did. He was kind of like a bull in a china shop, and bumping into things, breaking things, too rough, too loud, too, all these things. And we did an assessment with an occupational therapist, and it shifted how my brain saw his behavior. Mm-hmm. And it helped me get out of, like, I was feeling some fear and anxiety, like, oh no, attachment, what are we going to do? How am I going to manage this? And all of a sudden, when I saw him with sensory aware eyes, then there were, the great thing about learning about sensory processing disorder is there are all kinds of things we can do right at home to help meet our kids' sensory needs. And we can start paying attention to, are they sensory seeking? Are they sensory avoidant? What is it that's happening? And of course, kids with sensory processing disorder, and probably all of us even, there are things that we seek and there are things we avoid. Like, I'm pretty sensitive to noise. Mm-hmm. I don't like too much noise, which is hilarious given the number of kids I have. Yeah. But it gave us a whole new way of looking at him. And it was such a delightful thing to explore, even with him. He was a fairly little guy still, but like, we got a little indoor trampoline and we made a sand bin with toys that were buried in it and just all these things. And really it turned into a very positive thing for us.
That's great. Yeah, that was encouraging for me, because you can only eat an elephant one bite at a time. And this has been very similar to that experience. Never eaten an elephant, but in that, like, wow, that's a lot to take in. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah. And honestly, when I first heard of sensory processing stuff, I remember thinking, I cannot learn one more thing. Right. I'm just going to set that aside. One of these days I'll learn about that. Right. And if it hadn't been really brought right to my attention, I don't know when I would have gotten around to it, because I felt like literally the learning curve was so steep. In fact, on my blog, I had my whole series about this stuff was called My Learning Curve, because I was constantly having to learn new things. But learning about sensory needs and how to meet sensory needs is so very, very helpful.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get into all those tools because I want everyone to read the book. Mm-hmm. And speaking of the book, I've mentioned this on the podcast, but I am going to lead a group of anyone who wants to join. Pick up the book, read the book with me, and then we'll have Zoom sessions, periodically. I'm guessing, what do you think we need? 6?
Yeah, that'd be good.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
You can't really, sessions. Most people won't commit to much more than that because we're all so busy, but 6 is great.
We'll see how it goes. And I think it gives people information and then opportunity to sit and digest it together. Because like you always say, community is so important.
Yes.
And so I'm looking forward to that. And so we're gonna kick that off for the first of the year. And so I'm excited to share your stuff. Once we get that going, would you be willing to pop in and maybe answer some questions for everybody?
I would love to. That would be wonderful. I think anytime we can learn together in community, it's even better. So yes, I would be delighted.
So we're not going to get into all those strategies, but that's section 2. And then the last section I think is so important. And I say this all the time, we got to take care of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And you have some great things in there, mindfulness and simple, basic things that we really take for granted, like getting enough sleep, getting enough water. That's basic, but we
don't do it.
We don't.
Yeah, we don't do it.
Yeah, we don't.
I know.
One thing that through my journey of becoming more self-aware, looking inside more, is and my therapist calls it keeping an eye on the inside. But there's so many times in my past, especially parenting my older boys, where I would feel myself not having the strength to move on or being really overwhelmed or dysregulated myself. And I would just plow through, making a huge mess relationally and every way. And just learning to recognize that feeling and go, what do I need right now? Is it a cup of tea? Is it to go sit? I have this little acupressure mat thing that it's incredible. Just go lay on that for 5 minutes. It's amazing. Just different little things. And I think everybody has their, hopefully they're creating their pocket full of ways they can meet their own needs. But I think you spend that's a great section. Do you have anything you want to add on that?
Well, I think you're right. It's a lot of small things. It's not like, you have to go away for a weekend, although that would be
That'd be
lovely.
nice.
It's not like you have to take a fancy bubble bath, although that would be lovely too. But really, it can be taking a few moments, like sometimes just stepping into the laundry room, shutting the door, and doing some slow, deep breathing. Or I encourage people to choose some scriptures or even a line from a worship song or some kind of phrase that you find helpful and just make it your own, and repeat it to yourself out loud. Go in the laundry room and say, my help comes from the maker of heaven and earth, or whatever it is, or be still and know that I'm God. These things that can help us calm and center, because if we've learned anything, we have to be calm and regulated in order to bring our children into calm and regulation. Absolutely. They're not, if we're a little out of control and we're a little too loud and a little too tense and we're moving too quickly, we are not going to help our kids come into a space of calm. So we do have to calm ourselves. We do have to take care of ourselves to have the capacity to even do that.
Right. Absolutely. And it can be so headsy. It can just be something we say and we get it cognitively. But when we experience it, like when we have one time that we actually do it. We actually step aside, into me, it's more than a couple deep breaths. I really need to make myself take like 10, all the way through, all the way back. Because I will quickly go from, okay, I took 2 breaths. Okay. On to the next thing, but to say, okay, no, Tara, you need maybe other people don't need 10, but I need a minute or two, of breathing. Because unfortunately I didn't have great co-regulation when I was a baby. There was all kinds of reasons. And you know what? Our parents didn't, first of all, the 90s was considered the decade of the brain, right? I mean, like we're talking 70s for me, like we didn't talk about this kind of stuff. I mean, I know it was out there and there wasn't internet. People weren't, I mean, you didn't have
You had to go to the
access
library.
You could go get the card catalog and I don't know how you'd know what to look up, but you could look up attachment because it's been out there for a while. I mean, all these things have been there, but the conversations to, it just wasn't there. And our parents were giving us what they had. And
yeah, I think they were doing the best they could.
Yeah.
And
most of them,
they were coming from their own history of their own attachment relationships with their parents. We're all, this is a journey. Our whole life is a journey. And all we can do is just keep learning and growing and loving one another, loving our kids, and, supporting other parents like you're doing with your podcast. We really need each other to help each other along.
Yeah. So speaking of other ways you're supporting besides writing this book, I know I've read some of your blog, One Thankful Mom.
That's right. Yeah, OneThankfulMom.com.
OneThankfulMom.com. So they can connect with you there. And then you have something called The Village. Tell us about The Village.
Well, I think let me back up just a tiny bit.
Yeah.
I came together with another adoptive mom who's also an adoptee. So together we are the whole triad. And we started a podcast called The Adoption Connection.
Right.
And then we ended up just fleshing that out. We have a website, we have courses, we have all kinds of webinars and all different things. But probably one of the best things we offer is a membership community. And it's called The Village. And within The Village, we have a group just for dads. We have a group just for moms. We have an Enneagram and adoption group. We have behavior Q&As, which Melissa, my partner there, loves to do. We have webinars. So we come together and support each other, and we learn together. And it's a wonderful, wonderful group.
Yeah. I recently, as I was checking all of that out, I recently signed up to take, is it called the Compassion Challenge? Or
yes.
Okay. So you guys have a video. It's not long at all, but it gave a lot of food for thought, and it was very encouraging. And it was, when it's one of those things you don't want to speak about, but when you run out of compassion, I think there's a blocked care is what you guys talk about, blocked care, which is when you feel like you are pouring and for me, it feels like rejection.
Yes.
from my child, which is something that you can take for a while. And then you're just like, you retreat, you're, how many times have I thought, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. Knowing that's not the truth, knowing that I will I will rise up, I will. But in that moment, that's how we feel.
Right. And one of the things, if we do a lot of teaching about block care, it's one of our biggest topics. And one of the things we tell parents is this is not about your character. It's not about your relationship with the Lord. It is brain science. And that's not to say we don't make bad decisions. We don't sin, but there is brain science behind why it becomes so difficult to keep caring. And we can continue to meet our child's needs and actually provide and take care of them. But sometimes the heart sort of leaves. So we do a whole course about that. We have a free compassion challenge, which is just the adoptionconnection.com/challenge. And then we have a course that people can take following that if they'd like, called From Apathy to Empathy.
Yeah, it looked good. So
it is really
thanks
good
for doing that. I think that's, it's powerful, and people need a space to talk about it, because when we don't talk about it, it just gets stuck, and it's not good to get stuck there,
No, because then we isolate.
Yeah.
When we get stuck, we feel shame. So we isolate, and then things just get worse. We've got to come out of the dark and be honest and let people care about us and teach us. And
it's just most of the time, and I know this can go on for weeks and months and everything, but most of the time, it can move. It can shift. I can feel so stuck and so alone, and so all the negativity, right? We all know what I'm talking about. And then a week later, it can feel totally different. And if I can remember that, to know this is just an ebb and a flow, it makes life a lot easier to remember.
And I think that's one of the beauties of community, is that people can remind us, feelings come and go, and it's not always going to be as hard as it is today. We're just going to press on. We're going to have endurance, and we're going to be faithful in what God's called us to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lisa. You're
my
so
pleasure.
Sweet and kind, and your voice reminds me of Karen Purvis. That's very calming. You have have you always had that calming presence, or is that something you've cultivated?
Well, I don't think I was aware of it until I was really podcasting and working like this, but I have been told I have a very calming voice. So to even be slightly compared to Karen Purvis, I'll take as a huge compliment.
Well, you've spent time with her, and we become like those we hang out with. Another reason for good community, right?
Yes.
So thank you very much. I appreciate you, and I know we'll be in touch again soon.
Yes, sounds good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. This has been an amazing episode. I am so excited about the opportunity of leading this book study, of joining you, getting together in a community. It'll be an online community, but it's a community, and walking through this book, reading it together, and coming together with our ideas and our thoughts and our struggles. And so I'm excited about it. And so please be on the lookout. You're going to be, if you haven't signed up for an email, mamaswell.com, go and subscribe, because you're going to be the first ones to hear about this upcoming book study. And we're going to do this together, and we're going to grow, and we're going to comfort, and we're going to encourage, and we're going to have a great time. So I hope you'll join me. We'll see you next week.
Mama's Well.